Welcome everyone. It's so nice to see such a packed room after years of online events. So this shows the importance of this particular lecture. We gather here to hear the 2022 So Kwan Lok Distinguished Lecture on China, to be given by Professor William Kirby from Harvard University. This is the 11th lecture and the first time since the pandemic. Normally, this would be an occasion to gather with friends and colleagues to celebrate the best of China scholarship and to honor the person who generously endowed the lecture series almost 2 decades ago, Mr. So Kwan Lok, or Kwan So, as he was known to all of us. I'm greatly saddened to tell you that Kwan So left us last Tuesday, November 8th, exactly a week ago. Kwan's reputation as the most ardent supporter of GPS and the 21st Century China Center preceded my coming to UC San Diego 2 years ago, or a year and a half ago, actually. I recall meeting Kwan at a welcome dinner I attended at Rafael Pastor's house, who's here tonight. In a conversation we had on the side, I immediately recognized his warmth, his humor. We talked about family, we talked about China, and we talked about GPS and his thoughts about it. He was the longest serving member of the school's International Advisory Board. And in that capacity, he helped to guide and witness the tremendous growth of the school, and later the founding of the 21st Century China Center, his longtime dream. Kwan was a founding member of the center and a tireless advocate for its prominence. We'll miss him dearly. With me today are my 2 predecessors, Dean Peter Gorovich and Dean Peter Cowie, as well as Professor Barry Naughton, the current holder of the So Kwan Lok Chair. They're each going to take a few minutes to pay a short tribute to Kwan. And I'm also so grateful that Kwan's family, Kwan's wife and partner, Marian So, his daughter Annie So, and his grandchildren, Sam and Ashley, are also with us for this tribute. So first, let me turn to Peter Gorovich, founding dean, and then he'll be followed by Peter Cowie.
Thanks very much, and I'd like to begin by expressing my condolences to Marion and Annie and the family. It's a very sad moment for us, because Kwan was such a wonderful, loyal and encouraging person to have to work with, to a loyal friend to our school, the university, to Chinese studies, and to me personally. He was, I think what we call analytically an early investor or an early purchaser in a product. He was one of the first people to be interested in our school at a moment when we were completely unknown. We had hardly any alumni, hardly any faculty, hardly any programs. We were just a small institution on the other side of the campus growing, and he and Marion were interested in us, supportive, encouraging, wanted us to grow, wanted to help us. They showed faith. Imagine giving funds to an institution that people don't know anything about. He was one of the first people to do that. So he and Marion endowed these chairs, and I think it helped us to take off. I think it did something for Kwan So also. I think it helped him grow as an individual, as somebody who was a patron. It got him, helped him build the identity of somebody who was a patron of an important university, an important institution at that university. It helped him, he had this skill, he had this capacity, and I think it helped him develop as an outstanding part of such an institution. I know it certainly helped me grow as a dean. I have a lot of fond memories. One of my fondest is that of a trip that he and Marion and I took with then Chancellor Atkinson. We all went off to Hong Kong together. That was a tremendous amount of fun. being in Hong Kong with the So's and Chancellor Atkinson. I don't mean just the food, although that was a certainly nice thing about it, but I have a lot of fond memories of that experience, and there are lots of reasons to miss Kwan, and I miss him deeply already. Thank you, Marion and the So family.
Thank you. It's a privilege to be able to say a few words tonight. For all of you who knew him, you know that Kwan was a quiet man. He was a modest man who downplayed his achievements. But Kwan was also a person who combined a good deal of persistence with a deep passion for the virtues that he embraced. And those virtues started with his family. And to my mind, part of the remarkable experience that I had with Kwan over the 19 years that we worked together while I was dean was the way in which he saw his dedication to a dream for what could be done with the 21st Century China Center and the School of Global Policy and Strategy, how those ideals, those dreams that he had about how the world ought to be, mixed with his pride and his love for his family. When I had my early conversations with Kwan about how he wanted to be involved in the growth of the school, he would say to me, it's really important that we do this in a way that I can share this with Marion and with my children. And so that conversation of a circle of pride, of love, of ambition for important ideals were at the very essence of Kwan. And in a sense, it modeled the type of behavior that we all hope that we could have said about us, about our lives. Now, Kwan was also a person who, in his pursuit of these ideals, had a penchant for apologizing. And it was always an extraordinary experience. And I will tell just one short story about when he handed me a check for several $100,000 and said, I'm only sorry I didn't make more money in life so the check would be larger. But that was Kwan to the core. And his last major commitments to the school came to me in saying, I want these commitments to be made jointly with my family and my children. And I know that it brought him deep pride and joy when his children actively became involved in the school in the same way that Marion had. John, his son, is now on the International Advisory Board. And that commitment, that family journey together, is something that I had hoped would continue as a journey that all of us could join him in for a good deal while longer. I'm sorry the journey has come to an end, but not the memory, not the accomplishments, not the ideals that he embraced. And so to all of the So family, thank you for sharing Kwan with us.
It's a privilege to stand up here as the So Kwan Lok professor at GPS. You know, looking at these pictures, you would feel that this is a ceremony or a memorial. It really isn't. It's just an outpouring. You know, when we found out last week about Kwan's passing, we were shocked. Of course, everybody was shocked and upset. And our first reaction was, oh, we should call off the lectureship because Kwan can't be here. But as we thought about it, and especially as Guang Lei communicated with the family, with us at GPS and everybody, we realized, no, it really made much more sense to just go ahead with it, because it was what Kwan would want. Kwan was somebody, it's already been said, who didn't care about having his name stamped on stuff, but cared a lot about getting stuff done and about spreading the word. It's especially appropriate, I think, that we have Bill Kirby here talking about education in China and in the United States. Because Kwan, after all, again, it's not something he touted, but he cared deeply about education. He went to a high school in Guangzhou. You know, many people don't know this. He went to a magnet school in Guangzhou, graduated in 1950, and came out right after the revolution in China. He went to 3 of America's great institutions, Georgia Tech, MIT, and Caltech, before coming to LA as an aerospace engineer. And he always cared about the rise of Chinese universities and the role that China would play in humanities educational effort. So it therefore makes perfect sense that we would go ahead with this in the spirit of Kwan and in Kwan's memory. Now, I say that Kwan didn't care about having his name stamped on stuff, knowing that's really ironic in a way, because I carry in my wallet a business card that says that I'm the So Kwan Lok professor. So I've got So Kwan Lok stamped on me, in a sense, because he was, to use a very old-fashioned word, my benefactor. Almost like in a Jane Austen novel, you know, people have benefactors. He really was a benefactor that enabled me to do things that maybe I wouldn't have done otherwise, enabled GPS to do things that maybe we wouldn't have done otherwise. But the best thing about having So Kwan Lok on your business card is that interesting people then ask you to tell them a little bit about this person. And so it was always fun to, you know, tell a little story or two about Kwan, and shorter or longer, depending upon the audience, how interested they actually were. But those stories always ended up the same way. They always ended up with the fact that he was generous and that he was a good, decent person that you felt good being around, that you enjoyed talking to, and that you were proud to associate with. So people have talked about the contribution Kwan made, but I want to add one thing to that contribution, and that is that Kwan, from the beginning, was always pushing us to do a little bit more. He was always, at the end of the meeting, he'd always come up and say, well, are we doing enough to like spread the word? You know, are we doing enough to build the program here? Are we doing enough to build contacts? Are we doing enough to raise money from other people? And so that was great. You know, it was like having a parent who also, you know, would nag you occasionally just to make sure that you kept going, that you kept on your toes. And of course, he always cared about China, and he always cared about relations with China. Now relations between China are at their worst that they've been in 40, 50 years. I've been studying it. No question about that. And Kwan understood the reasons for that. But this pushing would translate into something slightly different today, right? It would come out something like this. I can almost hear him say this. Are we doing enough to stabilize the relationship? Are we doing enough to make sure that things can get better when the opportunities for them to get better do emerge? I can just, in my mind, I can hear him say that. And I think this is a mission that Kwan left us with. And so I just want to say, Kwan, we hear you, and we haven't forgotten. Okay. Thank you to everyone in the So family for their contribution. Now, I'm supposed to pivot and introduce Bill Kirby. So let me try and pivot here. It's an honor to do this. I hope I can do it. Bill Kirby is, of course, I think it's fair to say, first and foremost, a historian of Republican China. He is trained as a historian and done tremendous work that, now maybe this reflects my own personal interest, but Bill did tremendous work in explaining to us how Republican China in the 20s and 30s was in some ways a kind of a developmental state, to use his words, a state that was interested in bringing China forward as rapidly as possible, scientifically and technologically and other ways. Got it. And showing some of the links between Republican China and post-1949 China. That was tremendously exciting work. Now, in the meantime, Bill discovered that he had a tremendous ability to deal with those most difficult of all creatures, tenured faculty at places like Harvard University. And thus he got pulled more and more out of history and into other types of activities, such as including, being dean of the Faculty of Arts and Sciences at Harvard, where he did, I hear, a pretty good job. And that made him extraordinarily qualified to talk about what he's going to talk about today, which is universities. First in Germany, where he did his first graduate work, I think, then in the United States, and then in China. So he's exceptionally well qualified to give this talk, and I'm really looking forward to it. Bill, turn it over to you.
Barry, thank you very, very much. And I want to give my condolences also to the So family. It's an honor for me to be here. I had looked so much forward to meeting Mr. So. He is an individual of the kind that helps to make great universities. He wasn't an alumnus of this university or of the UC system, but he understood what many people who make a difference in the world. Universities are places you can give to, but you also give through a university to accomplish something. You give to UCSD if you want to empower its study of China, which is already extraordinarily powerful, looking at the individuals on the faculty in this room. You give through UCSD if you want to make a difference in U.S. China relations. And when you think about it, I think of this as a former dean, we're in this beautiful building. Buildings actually come and go. They can be named, but they come and they go. Even centers, the 21st Century China Center has, if my math is correct, 78 years left before something else has to happen with it. Professorships last forever. A named professorship lasts forever. Mr. So, think of the individuals who have held his professorship. Professor Naughton, whom we've just heard, Professor Scher, also a benefactor, Professor Shirk. This is a trifecta. I don't know of any donor that has been blessed with such quality in the faculty named for him. Anyway, I just wanted to say that to start because it is just such an honor to be here and to see such talent in the room that I know that Mr. So himself would have loved to be able to see. I'm going to talk now about our shared world of universities, about this new book with a photo of a Chinese building on it, the Beidalo, the Great Northern Building of Nanjing University, built in 1919 for the what was then called Jinling University, or Jinling Dashi, or the University of Nanking in English, by an American architect. This is part of the shared global world of universities in which we all reside. This is one as well. And we can come back to UCSD and its place in this remarkable world. But this is a story that begins here. The story of the modern universities are very old, but the modern university, the research university, is exactly 212 years old this year. And it begins in 1810 in the Prussian capital of Berlin, when Prussia has lost mammothly a war with Napoleon. And the King of Prussia, Frederick William III, says something that I have never heard at least an American president say, or any leader of any country. He said, we will replace with intellectual strength what we have lost in material strength. And he deputes this gentleman, Wilhelm von Humboldt, to create what was simply called a Lehranstalt, a place for teaching, but it becomes quickly a university, the University of Berlin. And it is here where so many of the values that we take for granted in universities are established. That a university should be, for the first time, a place not simply to pass on knowledge, but to create knowledge, to be part of a new and scientific age. Research is important. That research should be done by faculty and students together. The unity of teaching and learning, another principle that we take for granted. It should be done in an institution that has comparative autonomy from the state, even if the state is paying all the bills. It should be done in a university in which the center of the university is what he called the philosophical faculty, what we today would call the Faculty of Arts and Sciences. And it should have Lehrfreiheit, the freedom to teach, and the Lernfreiheit, the freedom to learn on the part of students. This concept of academic freedom has been central to the modern research university ever since, although imperfectly practiced almost everywhere. This is a place that became the model of the modern university through the 19th century. A call to Berlin was a call to greatness. You couldn't get a job at many American universities without a German PhD in the latter part of the 19th century. And let's think of a university that has adopted this. Like Kiki, let me ask you a question. I told her I was going to cold call her. As a graduate student in history, Kiki, what's the motto of Stanford University? The motto. The motto of Stanford. No, that's Harvard.
Let the winds of freedom blow.
But that's not really the motto. What's the real motto of Stanford University? It's in German. Die Luft der Freiheit weht. It is the winds of freedom blow, but it is a motto in German. So powerful is this idea of the modern research university that even though they couldn't pronounce it in Palo Alto, it became their motto. But then, of course, in Germany itself, the winds of freedom ceased to blow in 1933. The university collapses first morally, in terms of personnel, and then physically during the Second World War. Germany and Berlin is home after the Second World War to a new university. President Kennedy here speaking at the Freie Universität Berlin, a university founded in opposition to the now Soviet University of Berlin on the eastern side of the city. A remarkable speech, if you ever have a chance, even better than his Ich bin ein Berliner speech. And I was a student, actually, at the Free University of Berlin in the 1970s when it was, these are some of my predecessors, in that when it became not a pro-American, but really anti-American one at the time of the Vietnam War, I took a seminar at the Free University on Marx, 15 students in the class, 6 different communist parties represented. No one could agree with anybody about anything. Gesine Schwan was the docentin at that time, a woman who's gone on to some fame, but she never got a word in edgewise. But the moral of this story is that universities rise and fall. The Free University is now an extraordinary university in Berlin, but here is the mother of all modern universities. And I began thinking about this project when I went to the 200th anniversary of the University of Berlin, now called the Humboldt University, in 2010. And the president of the Humboldt University welcomed us all in this enormously ornate Hörsaal of the Senate of the university, and he said, and the title of our session was, the model of the modern university. And he said, and I quote, "Nobody would take my university as a model for anything today." He was quickly no longer the president of the Humboldt University, but it shows you that times change. So the Americans have their innings. This is when, of course, is the alleged founder of Harvard University, or the first donor to Harvard University. This actually, I won't even get into John Harvard at the moment. But you see that Harvard is a place that emulates Britain architecturally, at least to some degree, in the 20th century. There's a kind of a British, a cultural and economic backwater and pale imitation of a British college through most of, as an undergraduate college, through most of its history. It becomes a serious university only by emulating the German model under President Eliot in the latter part of the 19th century, who founds our Graduate School of Arts and Sciences. And a number of the people in this room are graduates of that graduate school, I'm happy to say. And it is really only under James Conant that it becomes a serious, in the 1930s and 40s and 50s, does it become a serious place in the sciences and in the hard sciences. You think, people at Harvard, sometimes people in China think that Harvard's always been so famous and important. But the first ranking I've ever come across of people who do scientific research, who do Wissenschaft in the German sense, no matter the discipline, 1910, and Harvard is number one because it's bigger at that point in time than the others. But who, let me ask someone else in the audience, Professor Pickowitz, let me ask you, what university do you think was pound for pound the absolute best university in the world in the United States in 1910? Hopkins is perfect. Johns Hopkins is an excellent answer, wrong. You have a guess, Professor Pickowitz? Hopkins is what I would have guessed, actually. Well, it's Clark University in Worcester, Massachusetts. Clark University is the Caltech of its day. And not everything, again, goes up. Harvard is like number 5 or 6 in here. These are all names, some of which have continued to be extraordinary as universities and others not. So universities, of course, this is where I'm staying right now as a visiting scholar at Berkeley on this sabbatical term. And here we are here at UCSD on one of the campuses of the greatest system of public higher education in the world, which is the University of California system. And this, of course, is its flagship. So if you think about Berkeley and what this means, just as an example, each one of these are kind of examples of larger points, case studies. But in the American point, the success of public higher education is really critical to the success of American higher education, broadly conceived. That's where most of our students are educated. And University of California, Berkeley, at least that chapter in this book, and happily, I would not write the same chapter about UCSD. It is a story of the slow motion self-destruction of public higher education in the United States, of defunding. When I was doing my research on this chapter, the faculty was, as they often are at Berkeley, in revolt. So were the students. The chancellor was being kicked out. They used to give at Berkeley, if you get a Nobel Prize, they used to give you a laboratory. Then they wouldn't, they used to actually give you a building. Then they give you a laboratory. Now you get a parking space. Things don't always go up there either. They have invested, and they will be paying until 2040, the interest on the renovation of California Memorial Stadium, part of the bizarre world of American higher education, which invests so much in intercollegiate sports, and the team is terrible. But that's, at least this year, I've gone to a couple of games. They have built a global campus for their international partnerships, a brilliant idea for a public university, not to establish a campus abroad, but to establish it at home. But again, the faculty wouldn't go along, so it looks in Richmond, California, exactly like that today. This is a picture taken 6 years ago. Berkeley, just to go back to this, if this type of situation continues, 44 out of 50 American states are disinvested in public higher education since the Great Recession. If this continues, the American scene will decline and the public universities will lead the way, but the private ones will follow because we compete for the same faculty and the same graduate students. A happier story, and I'll end the American side here with this, is that of this gentleman and his university. This is James B. Duke, smoking one of the 20+ cigars he smoked every day. a man who did more to addict Chinese and Americans to nicotine than anybody else, and proudly so. And he created this new campus for what had been Trinity College into this magnificent neo-Gothic essay, as Aldous Huxley called it, that is today's Duke University. A university created, even the steps were made to look as if centuries of scholars had been worn on them. But in fact, this is part of the architecture. But these people knew at one point, sometime in the 1950s, Duke University understood that it looked like a great university and it knew it was not. How was it going to become one? And this is a story that you find very seldom in the world of higher education. Relentless planning, a kind of a strong set of communal values. What are we not going to keep doing? What are we going to keep doing? And it has risen steadily. I find it, in my own experience, the most rapidly rising research university in the United States today, in part because it actually knows how to plan academically, not simply in terms of fundraising. And it's also self-consciously one of the most international. It has a medical school in Singapore, and I was their chief advisor on Duke Kunshan University in setting up a liberal arts college in China, outside of Shanghai, designed to be the Yenjing University of the 21st century, for those of you who know the story of Yenjing. And we'll come to that now, and this brings us to China, because this is Yenjing University, built in the 1920s as a Chinese-American project, but really a missionary-led school initially. American architecture again for beautiful Chinese buildings. Now the home of Peking University. Peking University students have been causing trouble for governments for a long time. This is the demonstrations of May 4th, 1919. Such a small number of people causing such big trouble for governments. But Peking University has as its roots, and remembered still today, the Humboldtian principles of Lehrfreiheit and Lernfreiheit. This man here, who received his doctorate in Leipzig, Tsai Ying-pei, the first minister of education of the Republic of China, and the iconic chancellor of Peking University during the 19-teens, during the May 4th movement, where he had on his faculty great liberal scholars like Hu Shi, but also China's first Marxists, Chen Dushou, Li Dajiao, on that faculty. He believed that the students needed to be given access to all forms of ideas. And is one reason why there's a statue of Tsai Ying-pei on the Beida campus today. And the liberal arts college, the elite liberal arts college at Beida today, is named Peiyuan College for Tsai Ying-pei. There are other universities that start in different ways. This is Chiang Kai-shek's National Central University in 1930, modeled on the greatest university in the world in 1930, which is still the University of Berlin. And you have this Brandenburg Gate that welcomes you into it. It's today's Dongnan Dashi, but then it was National Central University. Then, of course, you have Tsinghua University, founded in 1911 as a prep school to send Chinese to the United States, recruiting individuals to its faculty who had been educated in the United States. This is Jiang Tingfu, a great diplomat, as well as he's the chair of the history department, and a great diplomatic historian as well. And he was the teacher of my teacher, John Fairbeck, who learned his Chinese history at Tsinghua University in the 1930s. We have a long history, in other words, of learning one from each other, American and Chinese universities. And Tsinghua University, when it is founded, this is its original campus, is modeled. Anyone can recognize what it's modeled on? Do you guys? Exactly right. University of Illinois at Urbana-Champaign, because it was the president of Urbana-Champaign that convinced Theodore Roosevelt to remit Boxer indemnity funds to start this place. It becomes the greatest research university in China by the 1930s. It has a gentleman who is iconic as Tsai Ying-pei, Mei Qi, the known to Tsinghua alumni as Tsinghua 大学的永远的校长, the eternal president of Tsinghua University. He protected it from the state, from the Kuomintang in those days. He led that university and others to found National Southwest University after the Japanese invasion, and he protected freedom of speech and liberal education at China's most dire moments of national survival in the period of the war, and still revered today by Tsinghua alumni. And Tsinghua is known then and known today. These are characters known by every faculty member at Tsinghua, that it is a place for 独立的精神, 自由的思想, spirits independent and minds unfettered. So this is the inheritance of modern Chinese universities, the foundation from which they have grown today. Tsinghua University by the 1960s looks a little bit less like Urbana-Champaign and a little bit more like Moscow State, times being what they are at that time. Things don't always go so well. And of course, this great foundation of universities is nearly destroyed by Mao Zedong during the Cultural Revolution. But even during the Cultural Revolution, a few people graduate from this university, even when it isn't really teaching. But that's another story. And today, Tsinghua University, a place founded to send Chinese away, now at this Sushimen Shuyuan, Schwarzman College, named for, I'm happy to say, a Harvard Business School alumnus, Stephen Schwarzman, who had the vision of working with the remarkable Tsinghua president Chen Jining to establish here a school of international studies to bring the best and the brightest of the world to Tsinghua in what is to be, and what is aspirationally, the Rhodes Scholarship of the 21st century. And think about this. Think about your own students. Think of the students in this room. Think of this. Why would you want a Rhodes Scholarship? Why would you want to go to a cold, rainy, cloudy, self-isolating island off the coast of Europe when you can go to Beijing and have beautiful blue sky days like this every day? Who knows if this is going to work, but it might. That's the aspiration. And you see today we are in a moment in which the promise of higher education in China going back 130 years is being realized on a mass scale. This is one of 8 new campuses of Zhejiang University in Chiang Kai-shek's home province. There's even a Jiangjie Yujindai Zhongguo Yanzhe Zhongxin, a Chiang Kai-shek and Modern China's History Research Center, of which I'm an honorary member. It doesn't do much these days under Xi Jinping, but nevertheless. Look at Westlake University, having recruited extraordinary scholars from Princeton and elsewhere to found an independent private research university, graduate only, kind of to be the Johns Hopkins of China today. Shanghai Tech, which is aspirationally the Caltech of China, an extraordinary place that I visited shortly before COVID, or SUSTech, Nanfang Keji Dashua in Shenzhen, also an extraordinarily rapidly growing operation. The Chinese higher education system today is the fastest growing in quality as well as in quantity in the world. And if we are to succeed in maintaining our place in the world of universities, that is, we, the United States collectively, interacting with this world is absolutely essential. So when you think of this, this is one reason why Harvard is in Shanghai. We don't have that whole building, but we do have a floor in it with a nice HBS type room. And so many American universities have had offices. I have to confess, whatever we have done with this center in Shanghai, which I oversee, we're actually more known for the Harvard SUV, which is basically one of the hundreds of copyright infringements. But it's a very good SUV called the Hafo. But if you look at where things are going, and rankings are not everything, of course, we all know this, but the tectonic plates of higher education are changing. as they look at these individual schools, Tsinghua, Beida, Zhejiang, etc., as they gradually rise in the Shanghai rankings, or here in the most recent QS ranking, here we see Beida, number 12 in the world, Tsinghua, number 14. Who can make a guess as to what is number, 18? What's number 18 in the world? Harvard is a wrong guess. It is that small university on the northern shore of Long Island Sound, Yale. It's number 18. This is absolutely right from a Harvard perspective. We are actually somewhere in the top 5. I don't know where we are in this, but this shows you that the world is changing. And look, we have 5 Chinese universities in the top 50. If we had these kind of rankings as late as the 1920s, 8 of the top 10 universities in the world would likely have been German, and the other 2 British. Today, it's rare when any German university gets into the top 50. So you have to ask yourself, how can China not lead this world? I have no idea what Xi Jinping is shooting at in this picture. I just like the picture. Well, here's one reason, and a very central reason. You still have universities, not only with the statues of Mao outside them, but with the teaching of Mao inside them. A man who did more to destroy higher education and any form of education than any man in modern Chinese history, maybe any man since Qin Shi Huang. And if you ask a president of a Chinese university, why do you still have a picture of this destructive man outside of you? They will say, quietly, we missed our chance to take it down in the 1980s. This is one reason. This is another reason. Here are Beida students, Peking University students, protesting the arrest of other students who had formed, Xi Jinping has told all Chinese students to study Marx. You have to study Marx. So they formed their own independent Marxist study groups. And they read Marx. They read the real Marx. And they went out and started starting labor unions in sweatshops in South China. That's not actually what the Communist Party is about. As it turns out, they're thrown out, and 2 university presidents and 1 party secretary are sacked for supporting these students. But it shows you the idealism that exists among young Chinese students today, at least among some. Or this example, Professors Guo Yuan and Xu Zhangrun, very, very courageous people who have criticized vehemently Xi Jinping's usurpation of power at the Tsinghua campus. And they're there to present flowers at that memorial of spirits independent and minds unfettered. But they find that the memorial is under construction and they cannot do so. These are things to worry about. Hong Kong universities also now coming under a new national security law and almost surely will decline in part as a result. And then you have 3 major Chinese universities having quit international rankings in order to pursue education with Chinese characteristics, whatever that is. But my conclusion is that, first of all, that 2 of the 3 of these will be back. The other one actually doesn't matter in short order. There is no such thing as a university that is really defined by Chinese characteristics. Chinese universities have grown, modeled themselves after, cooperated with the great universities of Europe and North America. That is the company that they have grown up in. That is the company they want to keep, and that is the company they want to lead. The values of the leaders of Chinese universities are much closer to the values of the leaders of American and European universities than you can imagine simply by reading the news. We are part of a shared world of universities. And so to ask and answer in part the question, can Chinese universities lead the world in the 21st century? Obviously, the answer is yes, they can, but not alone. In partnership and in cooperation, in collaboration of the kind that Mr. So and those that helped make the 21st Century China Center and this school so extraordinary, and those who have supported the intersection of scholarship across the Pacific over the last decades to our mutual benefit. Let me just close with a few pictures here. Here's a gate, formerly a military gate, but now a welcoming into a city of learning in Berlin. Here is the new gate of Nanjing University, commemorating its roots in National Central University back to the Republican period of Chiang Kai-shek. Here is the gate, of course, of Tsinghua University. I couldn't find a gate in here at UCSD, so I did the best I could with this. And so if you can come up with a gate, I'd be very grateful to do this. But let me end with this one. Through this gate, and actually right through up to there was my office as Dean of the Faculty of Arts and Sciences. Through this gate, the Johnston Gate at Harvard Yard, came this gentleman, Hu Shi, in the year 1936 for Harvard's 300th anniversary. He was given an honor, he was the representative of Peking University, and he was given an honorary degree at Harvard in 1936. And he donated to Harvard this stele, which any of you who have ever been to Harvard Yard will have walked by many times and probably not read, because A, it's been worn, so it's not easy to read, and B, it's in classical Chinese without punctuation. But it's also in his calligraphy, Hu Shi's remarkable and famous calligraphy. But what it says is the lesson for all of us. It says, culture is the lifeblood of a nation, and it is by virtue of its culture that a nation arises. But truly, it is due to learning, 学, and in a sense also Wissenschaft, or research as we would call it, that a culture flourishes. And intellectuals with deep knowledge and far-sighted vision understand that in establishing a solid foundation for their nation, be it Germany, be it the United States, or be it China, the utmost priority must be given to the enhancement of learning. With that, I certainly and personally agree, and I hope you do too. Thank you very much. Sir.
We might have 2 mics.
Okay, I've got one on, so that's all we need. Yeah.
Bill, thank you for that fantastic talk. That was so perfect, and those pictures are remarkable. Thank you. Let's talk about Tsinghua for a second, because obviously that's sort of the focus in some ways of the culmination of this, that and HKU in your book, but you didn't talk about HKU so much in this talk. You know well that back in the 1950s, it took a long time for the Communist Party to stamp out all of the American residue at Tsinghua and get rid of it all.
Yeah.
And, it took a full decade to replace it with a really orthodox.
They transferred a lot of it to Beta, actually, too.
Yeah, for sure. And now it's happening again. So I'm sure a lot of people in this room have one question for you that's a very, very, very difficult question, and that is, do you think a place like Tsinghua can survive this kind of ideological campaign? And how long, I guess the second question would be, if it ended today, they'd be fine, right?
Sure.
But it's not going to end today. And so how long do you think these university principles, these Humboldtian principles, can survive in China under the onslaught that they're under now?
Well, in certain disciplines, will of course be more affected than in others. But if you ask the question, which I do ask in this book, can you have a great university in which, according to the Chinese Communist Party, there are 7 questions that can't even be asked, let alone answered? And of course, we would answer here ritually no. But whenever I say this to audiences and elsewhere, I'm told, well, there are lots of things that can't be said on an American campus too. But this is different because it's state imposed, and you have in a certain sense, one answer is, can you have great universities and can you even have liberal education in a politically illiberal polity? The answer from Germany in the 19th century is a qualified yes. You certainly can. You can have extraordinary scientific advancement, also in the humanities and social sciences. All of our modern disciplines really date from that century and then until the turn of the last century, in a political environment that was highly constrained, and in a professoriate that was also socially and ideologically very, very narrow. But the German state, the Wilhelmine German state, is no match for China in its capacity for pressure, in its capacity for ideological rigor, and also in its capacity to force people to learn stuff or pretend to learn stuff that they know is not true. And so the danger for places like Peking University and Tsinghua University, and I think you're right to say it's not something you're going to see overnight, but if the students of this university each year, the distance between what they know is true and what they are told is true grows greater every year, then you have two kinds of graduates, cynics and opportunists. And this is not good enough for the great country that is China, and not a good representation of the extraordinary talent of individuals there. That said, you know, these universities will suffer in this in certain areas. Tsinghua University just 2 days ago had a big session on how to approach issues in humanities and social sciences in the light of the 20th Party Congress. Well, what has come out of that, I have no idea, but I knew they were having this. But you know, you must understand that I am an optimist by nature, but I think it's true. These universities have survived the Qing dynasty. They have survived the warlord period. They survived the Japanese invasion. They survived Mao Zedong. They will survive Xi Jinping. And they will be stronger for having survived Xi Jinping. Political campaigns in China come and go. This one is deeper, long-lasting, and in many ways more dangerous because for universities, because of the clarity of the ideological message and the sense that universities are a target audience of that ideological message. And yet, when you're on the campus of a Chinese university, you talk to students, you talk to faculty, you know, you know this too, when you're in a moment in China when everybody is saying the exact same thing in the exact same phrase, then you know there's a real disagreement. And there is enormous dissent under the ground. And our colleagues in China will tell us right now, and they've told me recently, they haven't been this depressed since the first months after Tiananmen. But those months did pass also. We shall see. I think we need a little bit more time to see if there is a lasting damage on this, because you have the humanities in China in many areas that are not contemporary have in many ways been thriving in recent decades. If you want to look for a crisis of the humanities in China, you look back to the Maoist period when they are nearly destroyed. That's not the case today.
Let me ask one other question, and I'll open it up to the floor. You know, I mean, and this springing directly from what you just said, I mean, the enormous paradox, it seems to me, of a place like Tsinghua is that it actually was on the threshold of achieving this status of being a leading global university.
Right.
Just at the moment when Xi Jinping declares, no, we have to enforce this ideological orthodoxy. And to make it even more complicated, Chen Jining,
yes,
the former head, who is a kind of a hero in your book, right?
And he is. He was a remarkable university
president. A remarkable man. And now he's going to be the party secretary of Shanghai.
真的吗? No, 我晓得.
Yeah.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is the new news, right?
That's good news for Shanghai if he's able to act as this is one of the things that, you know, you and I have both learned over time, that you have extraordinary people put in extraordinarily difficult situations. I can't think of a more difficult one right now than this. This is a man who, was fearless in helping to build up this college, but also in running Tsinghua. His successor has also been an excellent president. So, good luck to Chen Jining. I wish him well. I think very fondly of him. And it's, China has what can one say? It has in its system, it has extraordinary leaders. And it has, sadly, we can say this in some sense, it has a system, however, that limits massively their capacity to do good in many areas. Not in all, but in. So I didn't know that. Good for you.
Good for him.
Yeah, good for him. I guess we'll get some out of Beijing.
All right, let's throw it open to some questions, and we may have some online questions as well.
And if people could identify themselves also when they ask a question.
Sure, go ahead.
You stand up and identify yourself.
Yes, I am master's here. Want to ask about the learning objectives. Do you think that those schools have? I took some classes in Beta about business leadership and about leader companies, lead schools, and they mostly seem to them to be more shapes than leaders.
More.
They don't have shapes. They don't have critical thinking, like talking class. They don't ask questions. It doesn't seem to me a leader material when they come. But then you say, oh yeah, the leader of science.
Which is actually not small beer.
I come from Israel.
All right. So nobody's as active as Israeli students. Okay, we can start with that. But I don't think that's correct. My experience, if you depends, it's pedagogy in part, pedagogy of a kind that speaks to big lectures. Of course, you'll have a passive audience and so on. But in my teaching of Chinese students at Tsinghua, at Beida, at Fudan, at this Dukunshan or elsewhere, they're extraordinary. And if you challenge them, they will challenge you. If you make the atmosphere one in which that is possible. And Tsinghua University, at least as I write about it, so Tsinghua University School of Economics and Management, it's a business school, of course, the single most difficult business school to get into in the world. It has a general education curriculum modeled on some of the best ones of Europe and North America. It has critical thinking as a central component to it, and that has been the model. Every single Chinese university today is experimenting under difficult pressures in recent years with general education programs, critical thinking programs, liberal education programs, because they believe what we say. They believe our propaganda that we teach students to be independent of mind, to be critical of authority, to become, the stewards of their own education, and so on. And I remember back when I was dean of arts and sciences at Harvard, I had a Chinese university president come to ask me about Harvard's then core curriculum, and I offered to sell it to him because we were getting rid of it, but he didn't want it anymore. If we were getting rid of it, he wanted our next curriculum. And we had like 1 million new curriculums or drafts of what we would do next. And every one of these was much more carefully read in Beijing than it was by my colleagues back in Cambridge. But that's not a high bar, to be sure. But the sense, they do not want to train the next generation of engineers in the last best technology of engineering. They want to educate people to be independent of mind and to be creative. How often do you hear the word innovation in Chinese universities? And this is, of course, at direct odds with party directives that, yes, you can do all that, but you can't do it in the study of history, you can't do it in the study of political science, you can't do it here and there and maybe lots of other places. And we will see how that plays out.
Yes. Raphael.
I would love for you to comment on the state of academic freedom at American universities today, and in particular, how you compare it to the state of academic academic freedom historically in the United States. Also, we still have competitive advantage vis-a-vis places like China in terms of our academic freedom versus their art.
Yeah, I think we have a massive competitive advantage vis-a-vis most places in terms of what can be said and what should be, how things are articulated, what you can argue in American classroom, and so on. That said, we have to recognize that our sense of academic freedom, even though these principles from Hummel go back 212 years, you know, if there was free speech, absolutely untrammeled free speech at the University of California, for example, then you would not have had a free speech movement at Berkeley in the 1960s. You have professors such as Fairbank being called in the 1950s in front of the House Un-American Activities Committee, investigating their alleged loss of China and how their own teaching and scholarship leads to this. We have a long, well, and of course, you know, the UC system conceived brilliantly by Clark Kerr, the man who kind of conceived of the way in which the different levels that formed the UC system would work so well. He was brusquely dismissed by Governor Reagan, Ronald Reagan, in a political act when Reagan was governor. And as Clark Kerr put it, he went out of his job, left his job just as he went into it, fired with enthusiasm, but not by himself on the latter part. So today, there are, I think, pressures from the left and the right of what can be said and not said in a classroom. And I think this is bad. We have, the University of Chicago has, to my mind, the absolute best statement of academic freedom of speech principles, which are, if you don't like it, you don't have to attend it, but if you're there, you listen, and you listen respectfully to somebody who has a different opinion from yours, even if you mammothly disagree with it. That's not the way life has happened on many American university campuses in recent years, and it is something that we should worry about. We should also worry about governors such as the governor of Florida and others intruding into the curriculum of what people can teach and how they can teach it, and so on, what theories can be taught in a classroom, and so on. So the institutional autonomy of institutions of higher education is always fragile and always under some threat. That said, it is in remarkably good shape, comparatively speaking, in the United States today compared to China.
I'm going to stand up so I can see other. Yeah, Harris, do you have some online questions?
Sure. We have some questions from online. I'm going to put a few of them together. Essentially, people are curious about what the state of U.S. China relations means for the future of higher education in both these countries. Do study abroad students for China, and for instance, have any role to play in continuing to increase the quality of universities there, or does the current state of tensions affect the ability of Chinese institutions to recruit top-tier faculty, that sort of thing? Thank you.
Great questions. Well, let me start with I was right before COVID in 2019, I was in Beijing with Harvard's president, Larry Bacow, who had given an amazing speech, it's on his website, at Peking University, on Peking University's own history of academic freedom, and quoting Tsai Ing-wen to make all the points that he would want to make about global universities, because there is nobody more articulate on this topic than Tsai Ing-wen in the 19-teens. But we met Xi Jinping in the Great Hall of the People. We had a private meeting, and the purpose of that meeting in part was twofold. It was Xi Jinping used the meeting in the press to call for more Chinese students to come to the United States and for more Chinese students to study abroad. He was giving a message through us to his own government, as far as I could tell. And then COVID interfered and we have a different world. But also, we made the point, because U.S. China relations were not very good at that point already, that there were areas in which universities can cooperate even when their governments cannot or are not cooperating. And I think that is part of our mission at this point in time, to maintain the connections, to deepen the connections with what have been our collaborators in China and with new generations of partners in China. Fairbank once told me that one of his biggest regrets was the cutting off of academic exchange from the early 50s to the early 70s, a period through which he lived, and the sense when China finally reopened in the 1970s, a sense that our Chinese colleagues had felt abandoned by the Americans and by their others. Not that it was or even largely the Americans' fault, but it was in part the Americans' fault, one could argue. That's something we should not let happen today. We have, just for our own selfish purposes as universities, enormous to gain by collaboration with our Chinese counterparts, but so do our students. And to bring younger generations of Chinese and Americans together, certainly no guarantee, but it is very possibly a foundation for a greater understanding in coming decades and beyond for the next generation of leaders of both countries. And so it seems to me an absolute no-brainer. This is a time, and for Harvard, we have this center in China, we're thinking, how do we re-engage and what do we do next to deepen what we are doing in China, even if Washington and Beijing aren't talking to each other?
I mean, to put a very concrete twist on that question, the joint venture projects that you look at in your book, Du Kunshan, Ningbo, Nottingham, and in a different way, Schwartzman at Tsinghua, what's your assessment of the short-term situation of those kind of innovative projects?
And find some wood to knock on. So far, so good. They are what you might call special education zones in this context. NYU Shanghai is certainly also extraordinarily successful. NYU Shanghai has a brand new campus. Duke Kunshan is building 20 new buildings as part of their phase 2 expansion. They have a phase 3 after that. Schwartzman has done very well, even with online education over time. But the difference is that this is not a set of projects that is likely to see expansion in coming years. It's very interesting that the current party secretary of Peking University, Hao Ping, a really remarkable man, he was the vice minister of education for international relations, who really stewarded the founding of these joint venture projects in his period in the Ministry of Education. The Ministry of Education today, how should put it, is not the single most welcome ministry for international collaboration in China, but it was. Maybe it will be again. So far, these institutions are untouched and unaffected, and I very much hope that that remains the case because they are prized. You know, they have joint venture partners. So Wuhan University has been an extraordinary partner of Duke Kunshan University, East China Normal for NYU Shanghai, and so on. And Tsinghua very much so of the Schwartzman program. So again,
we probably have time for about 2 more questions. Yeah.
I'm very grateful in that. My question is more about the fact that the university rankings in China has been quite so quickly is that a lot of the engineering departments they go very quickly. But at the same time, science department and social science and humanities, they're still kind of lag behind. So when Germany was experiencing it too, it had already won a lot of Nobel Prizes for sciences. But then in China, there are still like 2 or 3 of them. And another question is that if the United States became like the dominant winner of these prizes after the World Wars, and then a lot of them was thanks to the European talent flow into the U.S. after the war, during and after the war. But right now, a lot of the talent studying and working here, it's kind of hard for them to move backward. There are a lot of political turmoils or a lot of the restrictions or from both sides. And so I was thinking, because of these circumstances, because of these constraints, do you see that it will still like move to other areas like hard science, pure science, space science, or whatever they call it, in the next coming decades also?
well, as Barry noted, I'm a historian, so I'm really much better at predicting the past than the future. But I would say, these rankings, we have to take them, of course, with a grain of salt. You're absolutely right that you can rise in these rankings through particularly publications in a large number of particularly scientific journals in English language and so on. And you could say, oh, gee, China doesn't rank that highly in the humanities and social sciences. That's because these rankings are totally incapable of measuring the scholarship of Chinese in the humanities or social sciences. So it's kind of, so we don't know. And these rankings don't measure so many things. They don't measure teaching. They don't measure mentorship. They don't measure kind of feelings of loyalty to an institution. Of lots of things that will matter. But can China, I think if we looked, if we had these rankings are designed, you have to remember, how do these rankings begin? They begin because U.S. News and World Report is a failing news magazine. Nobody's buying it. They come up with another business model, and the audience is English speaking. And these rankings, even the audience is now global in all of these rankings. And the Shanghai rankings are taken the most seriously, but they are heavily skewed toward English language publications. This is so only a slight reflection. It's a reflection of exactly right, of certain. The U.S. News and World Report just had a new ranking of engineering schools. Tsinghua, number 1. MIT, number 5, or I don't remember, but somewhere down there. Harvard, number, quite rightly, 35. In this regard, but this, it's not quite pseudoscience, but it's just a sense of trajectory that one can get from this rather than precision.
All right, last question, right there.
I'm Joyce Mann, a retired professor of economics from Indiana University.
Great.
I taught at Kirby University for 6 years. I also taught at University. When both of us were on the panel at this
Oh yeah, right. Of course. Yeah.
Well, I will say something could be a little bit different from what you have projected.
Good.
Very optimistic. 2 points. One is you talk about the ranking. You mentioned that the ranking based upon graduation rate, upon funding, based upon number of papers, number of sites, all those standards are in advantage. In China, government funding, graduation, 100% graduation rate, and employment rate, and all this. So I think those rankings are very and very misleading. It's not accurate, in my opinion. That's one point. So we cannot.
But the U.S. rankings are accurate.
No, the U.S.
Oh, okay.
I don't trust in ranking. Okay. Second point is that you said Chinese universities they lead the world. I feel that Chinese universities have lost that opportunity to lead the world in at least 21st century. Largely because
there's 78 years left.
I know 70 years. I said I lost the opportunity, largely because you used to have this opportunity. Right now, well, first China has the university have been controlled by government, top down. And in the liberal arts, they have limited the number of students and also the textbooks and everything. Liberal arts education is very small. Secondly, the science, well, it's more like a government funding. I see the monopoly, corruption, and also the papers are based on fake data and all those things happening there. Okay. Most importantly, I feel so it has a limited humanity and the liberal arts education. Well, there is no freedom of thought, no, independent of mind. So I really think that China may make a big mistake, strategically. Not because very few people really know what's Western civilization. Well, we have Oriental civilization or Chinese civilization, but also Western civilization. We need a lot of people to know about Western way of thinking there in a society in order to compete, in order to, at least gain some benefits or progress in this competition. So that's why I really don't have the rosy assessment as we have that. I
So the question is, are you going to change your view?
So let me comment on two things there. I was at a meeting of the Central Party School of the Chinese Communist Party a number of years ago. There was an elderly gentleman. I forgot what I had said. I'd given a speech that apparently this gentleman did not like. And he gave me this big lecture about, Leninism and Marxism, Leninism, and China, and why it was so central. And he said, 你们西方人不了解我们中国. You Westerners, you don't understand our China. And I thanked him from the bottom of my heart, because I said, thank you for clarifying for me, because I had thought that Marx was German, but now I realize he's Chinese, and that Lenin was Russian. The idea of the so-called West in China is mythical. I've got to say, they have a Western political system of the early 20th century. But let me just put that to one side. The reason why I think I am optimistic about the future of Chinese universities, not perfectly so, but optimistic about their future and about our own, is that they can lead, but as I said, not alone, but only in partnership with others. And, I think maybe it's a wrong thing to ask that question of leadership. Leadership, first of all, is comparative. If the Chinese become recognized as the first and most important system of higher education, it is in part because of what happens here or what doesn't happen here. Do we continue this disinvestment in public higher education? It's up to us in part. But this is not somebody wins and somebody loses, and you have to have a victor in this regard. It's a crazy way to think of the world. Right now, we're in this moment in U.S. China relations in which somehow or other the Americans think we have to dominate semiconductors, even though it's our friends in Taiwan that actually dominate semiconductors, and we have to keep the Chinese from doing X and Y, or we have to control electric battery technology, despite the fact that the Chinese are much better at it than we are. And they're the leaders in EVs and in electric battery. Somehow or other, we have to win and they have to lose. They often have the same view of domination. It's never been true in business. Why should it be true in education? It doesn't have to be true in technology. No country reveres education more, and at the moment invests more in it, and we're talking from the family level to the state level in education than China. The Americans need, in some sense, in order not to compete, but to really be part of this growing world of higher education, to rediscover their own love affair with higher education, particularly with our public universities, if we are to maintain the extraordinary position that we've been privileged to have since the Second World War. Nothing lasts forever, but it's up to us, and we will do better to be stronger, and China will do better to be stronger, to work together in this realm. So that's how I shall end.
Bill, thank you very much. And thank you as well for ending with those particular words, which I think are so much in the spirit of Kwan, that they really resonate tonight. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Barry. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody, for coming.